Welcome to Emotionally Intelligent Change Management. My name is Andrea Orlando, and I'm the Director of Communications and Encore Fellow. For almost 2 years, we have been meeting on virtual platforms with limited, if any, face-to-face communication with our colleagues. When in-person interaction isn't possible, emotional intelligence, or EI, becomes more important than ever. Luz Gonzalez, an EI expert and founder of EQ Refined, will help you work smarter as you learn to engage this often forgotten skill set to lead your team through change management. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Luz Gonzalez. Welcome, Luz.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being in this venue and being surrounded with mi gente, los Latinos. Welcome to the Emotional Intelligence Change Management Workshop. As a Greek philosopher once said, change is the only constant. We can't control what's happening in our environment, and we certainly couldn't control what COVID brought. But management keeps changing, and it's very important to learn the tools at your disposal and how you can optimize them effectively. And that's what I want to do for you today, is show you the tools we have at our disposal, even as the world around us keeps changing. I'm here to talk to you about how you can merge change management with upskilling your emotional intelligence, how to recognize it, and how to shift into it. And with that, let's go to the next slide. We need to practice emotional intelligence and learn how to use it day to day. With the next slide, I want to introduce myself. My name is Luz Gonzalez, and I came across learning about emotional intelligence when I had to dive deep and learn about myself. I had to learn how I was managing the people that I led. How was I cultivating the relationships I made? And why was I making the decisions that I was making? I discovered a pattern within some of the decisions I was making. It was like I had to use a scientific method on myself to discover and how to develop my EQ mind. Through curiosity, education, and practice, I've been diving into the EQ world for well over a decade, consulting with many individuals and organizations to support them in developing their own EQ. Fun fact, I'm a mother of 3, and I love to watch real life documentaries. So share with me some of the TV shows that you've been watching recently. Next button. I've recently watched Aretha. I don't know if you guys have watched Aretha. Her life is fascinating, and I wanted to share with the community as well that I've been watching the Netflix special Walter Mercado last year. For those of you who grew up with him like I did, it's beautiful to watch his life story, his courage, and his leadership. It aired on national television, so I feel excited for our movement forward. So let me know in the chat box what you guys are watching. Next slide. And we're going to get to the itinerary. So the question is, why are we here today? Today's agenda, we're going to go over various focal points of EQ. Why emotional intelligence can be the next key milestone to measure your professional and personal success. We're going to go over ways to recognize opportunities to step up into your life using smart EQ, not just high EQ, and how to gain from this workshop. Now, in order to do this, I'd like to ask you to stop whatever you're doing. If you're multitasking, if you're moving around in the house or on your computer, if you're reading email, let's focus on how we can help you develop your EQ. Next slide. So what is emotional intelligence? This picture's here for a reason. While shuffling through our busy day-to-day life, we're getting through meetings, we're reading and responding to emails, we're setting schedules. If some of you have children, you're dealing with that as well. My son just texted me and called me, can you pick me up from school? So traditional mindset says, don't bring emotion into the workplace. We say, leave your emotions at the door. But there's a problem with this, in my opinion. You see, we're not robots. Even though it feels like it sometimes, it feels like we're on autopilot. Go from point A to point B, from point B to point C. Add, equate, rinse, repeat, robotic. But this is why I came here. The image here is that we're blurred. We're rushing from point A to point B. Words are left unsaid. Ideas go left unnoticed. But most importantly, people go unseen, unappreciated, and unacknowledged. The sense of belonging, personal purpose, and authenticity get lost along the way. So you see, the argument is that emotions get in the way of being productive. But I like to argue differently. I like to say that it's what triggers us that emerge to be disruptive. And emotional intelligence can be your biggest asset if you're in your professional life, and it could also help empower you. You see, emotional intelligence, which is also known as EQ, is the ability to deal effectively with your own emotions and recognize and support other people's emotions. In other words, how to best recognize your team's intrinsic motivation in alignment with a shared goal. Here in the next slide, we're going to support managers to look into 4 main areas called the emotional intelligence model. Next slide. Every decision managers make need to be backed up with data analysis. Analysis is the process of breaking a complex topic or subject and breaking it down into smaller parts in order to gain a better understanding. And I'm going to use the word gain over and over here. According to Daniel Goleman, an American psychologist, he helped popularize the American intelligence model. There's 4 key elements. We have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And I'm going to break it down for you because we can get boggled down with labels and titles, but I always go back to how am I feeling? How am I moving through something? Are you aware of how you interact with others in the workplace? Are you a shy person? Are you introverted? Or maybe you're an extrovert? Are you a strong personality? Are you a promoter? Or do you like to lead from the sideline? Are you a results-oriented individual? Do you need data and facts to state information? Or are you someone who goes by feeling, gut instinct? You see, self-awareness is the ability to recognize and understand your mood. What inspires you? What upsets you? How do you present yourself in any space? That leads me to the very next one, which is self-management and self-regulation. Once you become aware of who you are and how you get triggered, do you have the ability to regulate your thoughts, behavior, words, and action? You see, self-management is regulating yourself. For example, let's say for many of you who are at work, you have a client or a superior, and they might be upset with you. Do you have the ability to self-regulate, to self-manage? Are you able to restrain your automatic behavior within yourself and externally in the workplace? Now, I have a question for you. Would it be any different if it was someone on the road, in the store, someone outside that you don't know, or maybe someone that has less seniority than you do? Can you still practice self-management? Then we go down to the social awareness. Social awareness is the ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people. How are your words and your actions affecting others? What's going on in other circles? Empathy is when you recognize what others are going through. It's about recognizing the strengths in others and identifying that there's diverse social norms. It's about caring about people and contributing to the well-being of others. And lastly, we have relationship management. These are the 4 pillars. Relationship management is how do you manage people? How do you bring along all those different aspects of what I just went through? And how do you manage people? Do you remember people's names? Do you remember special events? Relationship management is also a strategy in which organizations use to maintain ongoing levels of engagement. When you build your network, relationship management is key, core to this relationship. Majorly, it's not about being merely transactional, but it's about really cultivating care. And that comes from emotional awareness, from really meaning it. This is all your ability to influence others through building your network, going beyond empathy, but learning how we can all contribute to the bigger picture. Next slide. So there was some valuable information that I got from recently from an ACED paper. It's the future of the US Hispanic workforce. We speak a lot about executive presence. We talk about how to move up the pipeline. But in the recent paper that I just mentioned, it showed that 45% of Latinas do not feel represented by the definition of executive presence. And another whopping 43% feel that they have to compromise their authenticity. So I've been told to make my name sound more American. And I asked, how do you make Luz sound more American? Again, how would you think that makes me feel? How would someone else feel when they had to change their name? If leadership is about authenticity, and we have almost 0.5% of the population, of the Latino population, feel like they cannot propel forward because they cannot be their authentic selves, how can we support them in climbing the corporate ladder and earn those positions in the C-suite and boardrooms? When you can't change the people in the room that you're in, how can you start to look at yourself, and how can you create the space to stay authentic and stay empowered? And that's my main goal for this talk. Next slide. Now, we've all experienced leadership in different forms. The effects of low EQ in leadership have been felt by every single one of us in this space. When leadership is lacking in EQ skills, we feel unheard and unseen. Our strengths and our abilities are not optimized. Now, I'm going to give you a story. Picture a scene. A CEO is speaking with his staff members. He's asking them for feedback from a recent event that was happening. At that same time, a possible prospect walks by. I have a question for the audience. What would you have done in this situation when you're speaking with your staff and a possible prospect passes by? I'd love to hear from you and get some interaction. And as you're writing down, I'm going to continue to go on with the scenario. Reacting immediately, I witnessed this. The CEO pivoted his body and he went to speak to that other person. How many times have you been in a conversation with someone and see someone else that you wanted to talk to and take off? Well, it was only a 2-minute conversation, but what I witnessed was the staff's surprise as they saw their boss pivot and leave them in mid-sentence as they were speaking. Mind you, this is not the first time that the staff has experienced this. When the CEO came back to hear the rest of the feedback, what do you think happened? This is very, very natural behavior, cause and effect. Have you ever experienced something like this before? What did you feel? Question, what did you do about it? So I hear make eye contact and wave. Yes. So do you, when you don't have the tools to effectively, or typically, I'm sorry, when you don't have the tools to effectively communicate, typically what happens is nothing happens. Internally, what I've witnessed is people withdraw. I notice that I withdraw when I don't have the tools, when I don't feel the space is welcomed for me. So because his continued lack of awareness, a consequence happened. He experienced high turnover rate. The consequence of poor communication leads to lower levels of engagement and diminished productivity, which result in employee high turnover rate. Now, in this scenario, we've all have the choice to contribute. The question is, have we? The other question is, will we? There's a higher probability that no one will say anything, which leads me to the next slide. And here I would love to get also feedback. What do you see in this picture? So as you guys are writing out what you see in this picture, I have a message. Adriana, in retail, always prioritize the customer if out on the sales floor, but in private setting, full attention. Yes, I totally agree. There's a way to tell someone, hold on one moment, can I just take this call? Excuse yourself in a polite way. Yes, Stephanie wrote, everyone shuts down. I totally agree. So now with this picture, Some people have told me that they see a team. I'd love to hear what your feedback is. Other people have said that they see confusion or blockage. Have you ever taken a course on how to manage your emotions? People afraid to share. Yes, I see that as well. Yes. So have you ever taken a course on how to manage your emotions? The majority of us have not. We usually manage people who are around us with how we were raised, what we witnessed in school. I have some more messages. Thinking but not sharing their thoughts. Yes. And micromanaging. Correct. So, how do you bring the full person to the workplace? There's another course. Have you ever taken an active listening course? How do you create learning modules, allowing your team to be present? You see, there's a difference between passive listening versus presence and active learning. Most of us will answer no to the questions that I asked earlier. I would like to share with you a story of Shelly. Now, Shelly is a mid-level manager. Shelly's working with 12 individuals. She reached out to me recently because she was dealing with a very delicate situation. Andrew works on her team, and unfortunately, his mother died due to complications from COVID. 2 months prior to that, he had another member die from COVID as well. Andrew was beginning to show signs of emotional overwhelm. He would begin and end every meeting swamped with his workload, too much to bear, and it was too much for him to start getting extra tasks on top of that. He'd reach his desk and he'd feel already burdened. Shelly, who wanted to support her, the person working under her, Shelly was able to take on some of those extra tasks. But it got to a point where she started realizing Andrew was becoming more and more overwhelmed, no matter how much she was helping. On top of that, Shelly was growing more and more resentful, inundated with the workload and how to best manage Andrew. Now, because Shelly wasn't given the tools on how to effectively communicate with Andrew and vice versa, Andrew didn't have the tools on how to best communicate with her. This was just propelling to emotions that were getting now negative. Now, how can you be an empathetic leader and help people without feeling resentment? How can you support your team and remain in compliance with your own workload? You see, empathy needs to be readjusted. If we're not learning how to communicate effectively with self awareness and self regulation in a way that brings on accountability and responsibility, then what we do is we stop engaging, we withhold, we withdraw, and we do not share what we really are thinking. And that's why I brought this image up here. One more thing that I want to point out is that the image has no faces. Currently, I'm not seeing your face. So, unless you ask me a specific question, my mind is going on to the assumption that you understand what I'm saying, that you're actively listening to me. So, working virtually has changed the landscape, but we have not shared openly before COVID appeared. COVID was just bringing to the surface what was already in the workplace many times. So, how can we begin to communicate in a way that's more transparent, even in this virtual world? Next slide. So, I want to take a moment now to pause because I've been giving a lot of information, a lot of knowledge on what we can do to support ourselves in the workplace. Let me know if you have any questions up to this moment. I've given a lot of information, so I would just love to dissect something of it that you have in your mind. But in the meantime, as you're typing, Jaime, he reached out to me yesterday, or we were in contact yesterday, and I asked him, "Do you have any questions because you're an HR person?" He did tell me he had a question around HR. And his question was, how can we navigate through mental fatigue? The pandemic has brought a multitude of complex employee relation incidents, which require a lot of mental bandwidth to ensure that we do our best to help with the workforce by prioritizing their safety and well-being. And I thought this was an excellent question for him to bring up in this space. You see, we're finding that HR and people professionals are facing emotional exhaustion. And on top of this, if you're dealing with it, more than likely your organization is dealing with it as well. I come from a community, and you probably do too, of figure it out. We're born of immigrants who had to come to this country and had to figure it out. It's in our DNA to learn, to work hard, to go forward, even though when we don't have all the facts. So don't ask for, unfortunately, we don't ask for help until it's kind of gone overload. And Adriana Huffington shares about it when she passed out one day from overwork. Now, here's something that you can do for free, and I wanted to give you some information. And it's crazy. It sounds so simple, but it's really very simple. It's called breathing. How many times have you been aware in this whole conference about your intake of breath? I would love you to facilitate some time out where you take 2 to 3 minutes a day and you come together and you do active breathing techniques. This could be done over Zoom. This could be done with an alarm on your telephone. There's other resources that you can also go to and look up to support your communication or active listening skills. And what about yesterday? Yesterday, there was some Latin music that was put up as an intro. I really appreciated that timeout. It's like a mental break just to bring up some music and start dancing. Recently, one organization gave their whole group a samba class. They put a Zoom meeting up, and if you wanted to take a samba, some Portuguese dancing. And I thought it was an excellent way to stretch, to move the body, to get some oxygen flowing, and to change the scene. It's really important to get out of your mindset sometimes. When you get out of your mindset, relax the body. I mean, the problem is still going to stay there. And then once you do that, find a way to remotivate yourself back to solving the problem. I do have one more question. What advice would you give to managers who are learning to navigate through unprecedented employee situations in order to preserve our EQ? Great question. So let me go a little bit further in the talk, and you're going to see the GAIN model, the GAIN framework. Next slide. Here's a quote by Rajiv Suri. He's previously the CEO of Nokia on leadership. He says, leadership is all about emotional intelligence. Management is taught while leadership is experienced. Whether you're aware of it or not, there's two aspects that live within each of us. And this goes a little bit toward the question that was just asked. Those that empower us and those that defeat us. In order to be an active leader, you have to be aware to recognize what empowers you and what empower your teams. As managers, we're here to support people and develop them. But emotional intelligence also helps you with your own self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness to help you manage at a higher level, and it brings you to leadership. So this is something that we have to look. How can we step into leadership? When have you experienced good leadership as a manager or as a boss? What was done and how can you adapt to that? We have another question. How is executive presence defined or measured? Oh, that's a great question. I'd have to look at that up, but in my opinion, what I've seen be defined as executive presence is what's present right now, and the majority is a white man, not Hispanic. So they speak differently. We have a collective culture and they have an individualistic culture. And one of the things that I like to present is we're merging our collective culture and the individualistic culture. We're seeing there's no one correct answer. We have positives in the collective culture where we want to bring everyone along up together. And individualistic culture, we learn how to talk about our achievements. And so we're learning right now to merge the two to become even more effective leaders. There was another question. How do you work with a boss who lacks emotional intelligence and communication? By David Betancourt. That's a great question. And I'd like to bring up that you can't change your environment. You can only notice what you can do and see how you can bring up the conversation. And we're going to go through steps right now. And this goes to the next slide. Next. There's some saying in government buildings which says, if you see something, say something. Now, I personally have a problem with this. I see it on the train, when I'm in the subway, I see it in the airport, I see it everywhere. You see, the context of the message, and I totally understand, it's about safety, it's about security, and it's about survival. My issue with this is that it's only said if there's something that will be in danger. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes I feel like certain workplaces have the same exact feeling, and it goes with David's question. What do you do when your boss lacks emotional intelligence? So there's like a survival feeling. Why should I say something when my job could be at risk? Why should I say something when it won't be heard or recognized? I was in a meeting with a female boss. There were primarily women at the table. Someone was doing a presentation and we had questions. I raised my hand and I asked my question. One of my colleagues rose her hand and she asked her question. And one of the male colleagues, remember the minority in this situation were males. One of my male colleagues also rose his hand and he asked a question. As the presentation progressed, the same people who asked questions earlier had follow-up questions. So I spoke. I raised my hand. My female colleague spoke. She raised her hand. But when the same male colleague who spoke earlier began to ask his follow-up question, our boss turned and looked at him and said, "Can you let someone else have a turn to speak?" The room went silent. I, who was sitting next to the male colleague, turned to him and said quietly, "Take a breath." He said, "How did you know?" So I put myself in his shoes. I thought of how would I feel at that moment, witnessing, wait a minute, why did you single me out? We've all witnessed what has occurred in situations similar to this. You have been sitting somewhere in the workroom and you witnessed something occur. But was anyone going to say something about it? Again, normally the answer is no. We all have a choice to make. Leadership is about getting out of your comfort zone, and this is a very uncomfortable situation. What would you say in a situation such as this? Let's say you were experiencing it. Would you say something? How would you have approached the situation? I personally decided to say something. I approached my boss after the meeting and I asked her, "Are you open for feedback?" And that's how our conversation started. How can you get your team members to open up and be more vocal? You see, by being more vocal yourself, you lead by example. I'd like to point out that it's not about changing others, like I mentioned before. It's about changing myself. I saw something and I said, let me step up. I have to admit when I'm wrong. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I have my pride and it gets very big. But I have to be willing to see, am I getting uncomfortable right now? Are you approaching me in a way that I don't appreciate? Or am I able to listen to what you're saying beyond the words? Show me, but in a way that doesn't have to be cruel or offensive, but supportive of change. Next question. Next slide. So let's begin by collecting measurable data to increase your EQ and support change management. Ask yourself a question. What am I feeling in this moment? What is happening and what do I think about it? Perform research by asking questions. Conduct an experiment. Practice active listening instead of rushing to provide the answers. Try communicating in a variety of styles. What's the best way to convey a message with your team? Or hear about what their concerns are. Be open to humility and as well as accountability. Observe your environment. Learn about someone's story and their experiences. Have a conversation with them and learn what motivates them. You see, 70% of employees said that their sense of purpose is defined by their work. So, like it or not, as the company leader, you play an important part in helping your employees find purpose. How are others reacting to you? Do they feel inspired by your leadership and your direction? Cultivate relationships by reaching out. Leaders look for gaps that can be filled. They look for flexibility, creativity, and innovation. Next slide. So we spoke about becoming aware, self-aware, and regulate yourself. But the question that I get time and time again, okay, I know that logically. How can I put this into practice? So I want to show how we can all gain and lead with awareness. Here, we'll dive into creating an action plan with the GAIN model in mind. It's something that I created to help me move forward with my emotional intelligence. And this could support David as well. Oh, we have a question pop up. What advice do you have for Latino professionals on leaning into their authentic executive presence? Oh, I love that question by Jai Vargas. It's all about authenticity. And before I go into the next slide, I was told also to stop moving my hands. So I was thinking, okay, let me put my hands down. I was told, don't smile. So I was thinking, okay, I have to do this. But I was thinking, as I'm doing all this and my mind is concentrating on these things I can't do or how I should behave, I'm not being authentic. I'm not being in my full power self. I'm not observing or speaking the way I naturally want to. So I'm not being authentic. I'm not being in my executive presence. I'm not being my full leader in this space. So ask yourself, how do you feel comfortable? Who are you? Then ask, is it offensive? Are you someone who has to be in someone's face? Are you someone who speaks very quietly and like this? So also find a balance. How do you resonate with people? How can people resonate with you? How do people agree or follow or feel inspired by you? And here we're going to have the steps for gain with the next slide. So G is for gather relevant data. There's data everywhere. There's data with body language, and we're going to go into that in a little bit. There's data with how I'm speaking, and we're going to go into that as well. There's also 4 ways that we can get triggered with automatic responses. There's the fight response, flight response, freeze, and fawn. And you've heard of these. Fight is when you want to be aggressive or you're feeling defensive. Flight is when you want to run, you want to flee the situation, you want to avoid it. Freeze is literally being incapable of moving or making a choice. And fawn is about pleasing a person to avoid conflict. Now, think of the last time that you were triggered. Did you argue? Did you want to avoid the situation? Did you want to disengage or check out? When you're becoming self-aware, you're recognizing your physical sensations. Next slide. Once you've gathered your physical sensations, assess the situation by first pausing. Instead of immediately reacting, pause. And this steps into executive presence as well. Take a conscious breath. Introduce self-regulation. At this moment, when you don't pause, you're going automatically, like that picture I showed before where it's all blurry. Now, bring in self-management. Why am I defending myself, or why am I feeling attacked? When we talk about social awareness in this situation, why is this person doing, saying, acting, or being this way? In order to assess the data, you need to pause to evaluate the current situation. Next slide. When you pause and assess the current situation, you are now able to initiate a proactive response rather than being in a space of reacting. Many times we're reacting in life. So remember when I told my male colleague, breathe, take a breath? There's a reason for that. You see, breathing is like a reboot. When I focus my attention on breathing, then my thought is not the main focus of my thinking. So right now, I'd like to ask you, take an active breath right now with me. When you take an active breath, it has a way of grounding you. How did it feel to take this active breath right now? It's a conscious breath. That's part of self-regulation. Next slide. Then we have social awareness. We want to see how you can support yourself in seeing your environment. To step into relationship building, you have to decide how you want to navigate your next steps forward consciously. I was navigating my next steps consciously when I spoke with my boss, asking her if she was open to feedback. You see, my attention was on my breath versus reenacting what her possible response could be. I That left me open to dialogue with her. I wasn't expecting or calculating or assuming the response she was going to give me, but I was able to communicate effectively. Next slide. One of the resources that I have for you would be to gather data from your physical sensations, assess the current situation by pausing before moving forward, and not have a reactive response. Initiate a proactive response by aligning your emotional intelligence with with your intention, and navigate your steps forward consciously with a career of clear communication. With the goal of clear communication and building relationships. In order to gain in any scenario, use the 4 pillars to enhance your emotional intelligence. Next slide. Now, I was in a conference recently where people were sharing various ways of saying thank you, saying hello, talking about their culture. Some people said gracias. Some people said grazie, Italian. Other people say konnichiwa. I shouted out, forget about it. And there was a reason for that. I wanted to show that people communicate differently. I've been living here in New York for the past couple of years, and we all have our unique way of expressing ourselves to create, you know, relationships. So there's this thing where we have to recognize different various forms of relationships. I spoke about earlier body language. There's a rule called the 7-38-55 rule. And it shows that more people look at your body language to see what you're communicating rather than your words. Tone also has a lot to do with it. So when we talk about Latinas who could be aggressive or angry, Latinas because they can get emotional, that's a form of microaggression. And so the question there would be, how can you maneuver through those situations? There's no doubt that Hispanics in the workplace have faced bias and discrimination, but we have to come from a place of clarity, courage, confidence, and connection to ourselves. Notice the tone of voice when we are relaying a message. Notice if we are getting triggered. Next slide. I'd like to get your feedback here. What do you see in each image? What do you see here? Some people have told me they see a distracted woman, or a woman that's relaxing while her baby is communicating with the man, stretching out the hand, and the man is stretching out his hand. There's a smile on his face. We can't see the face of the child, but we're assuming that there's reciprocation on the child's end because the body language is communicating something. There's an image on the other side, and it's someone in a meeting. Someone described this person as being zoned out. Someone else described this person as being deep in thought. You see, communication is beyond words. A picture can tell 1,000 stories, but it could also display something deeper. How do you prepare to meet the person and not your bias? I think this is a pivotal question. Using the game framework, it can help you to open up to a situation, because just as the picture says, you can have so many personal biases. So we want to look beyond that, and we want to be giving an opportunity to the people to see what they want to share with us instead of automatically assuming and filling in the gaps. Next slide. We have here contrast of engagement and disengagement. Disengagement and lack of focus. Body language. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So many institutions point out that there's a lack of nonverbal communication and proximity as the main downside of remote work. This affected cohesiveness and creativity within teams, especially in large companies. Keeping in line with work-life balance, it has also been a big issue that companies have been dealing with, and individuals. As mentioned by Jaime earlier, Many individuals mentioned mental health concerns as managing household duties and other drawbacks from work have affected their balance. I learned a way to support my own self with some of these drawbacks before COVID has appeared through emotional awareness. Emotional awareness is a term coined by Gary Zukav. He's the author of The Seat of the Soul and most recently, The Universal Human. You see, he showed that we often have repetitive thoughts, and sometimes they empower us and bring us closer to who we are in alignment with why we're here on this earth, or they can deter us from our power. And what I recognized was 80% of us are repeating negative thoughts throughout the day over and over. We have between 12 and 60,000 thoughts a day. Now, how do you merge emotional awareness into your day-to-day practice? Next slide. After my separation from the father of my children, I felt horrible pains in my stomach. This is over a decade ago. I would be doubled over in pain, and I went to go see doctors, and they said, "You're fine." In my mind, I was thinking, how was I going to financially bring my family forward? Now, fast forward a few years, my daughter was diagnosed with a brain tumor. As soon as she was diagnosed with a brain tumor, I felt a lump in my throat that wouldn't go away. And I didn't know why that was there. You see, I studied under Gary Zukav in 2013, and I began to connect my stomach pains and the lump in my throat with my unconscious thoughts. Through gathering the data of my physical sensations, I learned that my pain was originating from entertaining repetitive, negative, unconscious, or sometimes conscious thoughts that removed me from my ability to choose to empower myself. Now, this is very powerful information because, again, you cannot choose sometimes your environment. You cannot choose how COVID has brought up the world, has brought to the world a whole new scenario that we're dealing with. But we can be aware of what's happening within our own body. It's giving us data. Next slide. I'd like to ask you that for the next 7 days, this is a personal challenge. Pay attention to your physical sensations. Focus primarily on 3 sections of your body, which would be your throat, your chest, or your stomach. Is it feeling tight? Is it feeling open and easy to speak? Are you feeling a tightness in your chest? Does it feel like an elephant just landed on you? Or how about your stomach? Is your stomach fine? Do you have butterflies? Is it tight? Or are you having pains? I told Gary at one point I didn't feel anything. I assumed that meant I was good. He said, "Well, if you're not feeling anything, it just means that you're emotionally unaware of what's going on within you." I was so focused out there that I forgot to look internally. And I've started recognizing that what was going on internally was connected to my thoughts, and vice versa. My thoughts were connected to my body. Now, with that being said, let's go to the next slide. Remember this image? We didn't have pictures of faces before. It was all blocked. I bring this up because um, you need to take the 4 pillars of emotional intelligence. You need to take the GAIN framework and emotional awareness and bring them all together into your own life and see how you can start gaining, moving forward, building relationships. How can you get empowerment back into your life? I'd like to point out again that it's not about changing others. It's about changing and recognizing what's going on within you. Next slide. Here, it's in the data. Emotional intelligence is a win-win. On a side note, Motorola manufacturing facility provided emotional intelligence training and stress management. And after they did that, 93% of their employees had an increase in productivity. Next slide. I've put together some tips to enhance your change management using emotional intelligence and help teams develop safer environments by creating a few ground rules. I would like to know, how would you like this workshop to support you in the workplace? And as I'm saying that, I want to go over how to have active listening. When you have active listening, you're not preparing your response. when you communicate effectively, you are open, removing biases. And lastly, when you step into leadership, it's because you see a gap and you do what's uncomfortable. Next slide. We have accountability. Accountability leads to empathy that can be supportive. Don't let it be crippling. And at the same time, notice when relationship building is being brought forward to you, giving you the opportunity to make connections. Encourage teams to give you feedback. Help them learn to respond, to give you input, and you give them input. Try not to see it as a criticism, but encourage teams and individuals to communicate openly. And with that, I'd love to hear if you have any questions. We did get a question earlier, and I will go up back to the message. So we have a message here from Blanca. Experts say that nearly two-thirds of the meaning, experts say that nearly two-thirds of the meaning during an interaction is derived through nonverbal messages. For example, body language. How do you tie non-linguistic messages that are consciously or unconsciously encoded and decoded through various mediums, such as facial expressions, body gestures, space, touch, eye contact, time, tone, and the environment in which people communicate, to emotional intelligence? So you're saying, how do I tie non-linguistic messages that are consciously or non-consciously decoded through various mediums to emotional intelligence? It all ties in together, Blanca. And thank you for asking the question. You see, when I'm open and I'm not expecting a response, but when I'm open to really communicating with you and active listening to what you have to say, I'm able to connect with you on a one-on-one. Now, you might be wherever you are and I might be wherever I am, but if we want to really connect and listen to each other, we have to step away from our preconceived ideas. And our body language is giving us information. Am I in an open position or am I closed? Do I feel like detached or do I feel engaged? You know, when we give eye contact, we're supporting one another in communicating. It's a safe space. Now, I can create the safe space or I can be welcomed into a space. And I feel that when we as Latinos can gather this information and introduce emotional intelligence into our day-to-day practices, we'll see how further ahead up the pipeline we can stay with our executive presence of being who we are, saying our name the way we say our name, um, uh, moving our hands the way we move our hands, turning up some salsa music and getting excited to feel the music move through our body and dancing. You know, when we collect different aspects of ourselves and develop ourselves in the sense of growth and prosperity for all, you win. That's what true leadership is for me. And that's what I hope for this environment. And thank you for your questions. We have another question. I don't know if we have enough time. What advice could you give to someone whose superior has low emotional intelligence and it hurts the morale of all who work under them? So this is a perfect opportunity. If you see something, say something. Do you have so just like I spoke with my boss had the opportunity to listen to what I had to say. She then took it and made her own decision. I could not be attached to her decision, but I knew that I had stepped up. I knew that I had contributed what I saw in the best way forward. Now it was up to her to make the same decisions. Again, the attachment to other people connecting to this and to speaking the way we want them to speak is not productive for us. What would be productive for us is to own our own body language, to own our own communication skills, to own our own EQ, and see how we can improve the space in which we evolve in or rotate in or are in any space. There's one more slide I'd like to share with you. And it's one of my favorite quotes. Angry people want you to see how powerful they are. Loving people want you to see how powerful you are. So with the question that was asked, with the person that hurts morale, if we are able to shift and see within ourselves that person with some compassion, we can start recognizing how we can move forward. If this person speaks in a way that's demeaning, is he taking your power away? Or are you giving it away? You see, as leaders and managers, this is a path and opportunity toward effective change management. Again, you cannot control those who are around you, but you can control how you manage situations. How do you react? We have another question. How do you balance standing up for yourself versus being seen as defensive or combative? I love this question. Let me take a breath. How do you balance standing up for yourself versus being seen as defensive or combative? Feel your body. Remember, I gave you the 7-day challenge. Feel your body. Do you feel a weight inside of you? Do you feel like you have to fight for yourself? At one point, I was saying, you can't talk to me that way. And someone asked me, do you feel empowered right now? And I said, no, I feel angry. I feel upset. How dare this person speak to me this way? And I recognize I gave away my power in that moment. How can I stand up and balance speaking up for myself and not being seen as combative? I can't have any control how people see me. I can have control over how I am in a space. If I take a breath, like I shared with you earlier, I'm able to reboot, realign with my intention. And my intention is to support you as best I can possible. My intention is to be in the space and help elevate all of us through my brilliance and through your brilliance. You see, we each have a part to play in this puzzle. I like to say we're a big jigsaw puzzle. No piece is the same. They're all unique. You can't copy another piece. No piece is more important than any other piece. And if there's a piece missing, then the puzzle's incomplete. We all have to show up as our authentic selves, and that's executive presence. There is no definition of an executive presence. It is how you are and how you connect to other people. Do you inspire? Do you help them go up? Do you help show them how powerful they are, as this message says? And with that, I'll share my last slide. Keep in touch with me. I have some more resources that I'd like to share with you. If you'd like, you could reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd be so excited to hear any of your feedback or takeaways. Tell me how you think I could support you better in the emotional intelligence realm, how to build your own EQ, and let's keep in touch. Thank you. So we have a few more minutes left. I have another question here. Nonverbal communication can be cultural. For example, eye contact in general for Latinos is difficult because we were raised to not stare. We tend to make eye contact and then look away and then go back to eye contact and then look away. I know from a non-Latino colleague that she misunderstood this as her Latino coworker not being engaged. It's important for us to educate ourselves on what nonverbal cues may be influenced by our culture. Thank you. Yes, this is Blanca. Yes, thank you for this comment. It's true. We have cultures that don't do eye contact. We have cultures that stand up really close. We have cultures that need that distance. In fact, yesterday, it was actually Blanca. Thank you. Blanca was in a space and she was put into the same group that she was yesterday in the networking group. And very straightforward, she said, I'm going to go find a new group. And there was no malice around it. And I appreciate her directness. I appreciate her being her authentic self. Because when you are your authentic self in a space, you can't do anything to control how other people see you, but you can do something about how you project yourself. Speak clearly, speak from a space of non-confrontation, but as an empowered self. And with that, I want to go back to asking some of you guys, what were your takeaways? What were some of the takeaways that you received? I got a message before talking about the GAIN framework. I see here, oh, such a great presentation. Thank you. I have had to explain my eye contact and how I have to make conscious efforts to do this in meetings, conversations with team members too. Yes, Julia, thank you for sharing that. Again, I have a wide group of friends, very diverse, because I love people and I love to hear their stories. It's one of my superpowers. My superpowers is to really listen to your situation. I like it. I'm curious. I want to know about your music, your culture. What language do you speak? What are they doing in your country? And so I'm also an advocate when I see injustices happening all over in different countries, not just Colombia, not just the United States, but different countries, Hispanic countries, Arabic countries, Asian countries. I want to hear about the plight of the Indians, the farmers. I want to hear about what's happening right now in the Philippines. I lived in the Philippines. But I want to connect to individuals because I feel that together, unidos, as Carlos's group is called, unidos, we can surpass injustices in this world. We can support one another, be allies, but be allies in a way that's productive, be allies in a way that empowers, and be allies in a way that's very clear. What is the objective? The objective is to raise everybody. I have a question here. Can you comment on balancing personal versus professional relationships, especially with teams that you lead? Oh, great question. Great question. Before I say that, can you go back to the previous slide, Carl? Someone is asking if they can repeat the quote about angry people. If Carl's there, if not, I could share it. So can you comment about balancing personal and professional relationships, especially with teams that you lead or manage? So professionalism. Professionalism is about respect. It's about accountability, responsibility, integrity, and virtue. When you're talking about someone in a professional realm, there's things that have to be done. And when I talk about accountability, what is your role in the professional relationship? Are there boundaries? Is someone taking your time? Again, when you want to focus on the person out there, you're forgetting to look internally. What can I do right now to bring balance back into my own life? Are there boundaries that are being crossed by the other person or by me? Where can I align to my courage and communicate? What line is being crossed? When we talk about professional and when we talk about personal, are you talking about a relationship, a personal relationship in the workforce? Christopher, if you can elaborate a little bit more, I'd appreciate that. But we're not getting the other slide. And so what the quote was, oh, there it goes. Angry people want to show you how powerful they are. Loving people want you to see how powerful you are. And going in line with Christopher, I don't know if you can write me back, but going in line with your question about commenting on balancing personal and professional relationships, are you someone who wants to encourage and cultivate other people's brilliance? Is it crossing the line? So again, stay in your integrity. Follow your emotional awareness. What's going on within your body? Do you feel uncomfortable? Are you doing something that you don't really want to do? Are you saying something that you don't really mean? How do you align back to your purpose? And how do you align back to your original objective and goal? So it's about your own communication and bring power back to you and to your life. So I think we are loose. We're out of time. We need to move forward. Okay. Thank you very much. See you soon.
It's now time to enter the networking lounge to join us for the first networking break of the day. If you posted to social media with the event hashtag HacerLPP21 and tagged us, you're already entered to win a Dell laptop. And we'll be announcing the winner during the networking break starting in just a few moments. I look forward to seeing you there.